Bosque Redondo reservation. And a lot of them just died from starvation and from the cold. I mean, a lot of the marches happened in like March and February when it was just bitterly cold.
It was just almost too much to bear. And of course, in many cases, they were separated from other family members. Or there were some people who went on the long walk to maintain connections with the elderly or with the young. But it must have been a terrible, terrible thing. We know it was.
Bosque Redondo appeared along the Texas border. Cottonwood trees lined the avenue leading to Fort Sumner. The Bosque Redondo Reservation encompassed some 160 square miles.
There was one of the first Navajo leaders who took his people to the Bosque Redondo, and by the time he'd gotten there, he'd lost, I think it was 15 people of his band. He gets there and the officer notes that he was met with such emotion by his kinspeople who were already there, and they hugged and embraced, and he said there was much tears as they met and greeted each other.
Kit Carson's military campaign surprised General Carleton. He anticipated 3,000 to 4,000 Navajos.
The Navajo surrender overwhelmed the Army. Thousands of Navajos came in.
A December 1864 report counted over 8,500 Navajos and over 400 Apaches.
President Abraham Lincoln probably did not anticipate Bosque Redondo. He, in fact, did not pay a great deal of attention to the American Southwest.
Disease spread through Bosque Redondo.
They were not used to the food that was offered to them as rations. You had white flour, beans, green coffee beans, rancid bacon, and they weren't used to that, and so a lot of them ate it. They didn't know how to prepare it, and then they died. They got diarrhea and dysentery and died from the food as well.
Pecos River water was alkaline and barely drinkable.
And also, they said that the soldiers made fun of them. They would take their young women to their quarters and use them as sex slaves.
Wood near Bosque Redondo was quickly depleted. Available timber came from great distance. Journeys put Navajos at risk from raiders.
And then, of course, as the years went by, the trees began to dwindle. And then they were reduced to using their hogans for firewood. And in the end, they were reduced to living in a hole which they dug into the ground and just cover it with canvas. It was a very terrible situation.
Crops turned to dust under an onslaught of insects and drought.
Bosque Redondo was one of Carleton's greatest miscalculations. The Navajos and the Mescaleros were unable to support themselves there.
The defiant Manuelito surrendered after unrelenting pursuit.
He was kind of like the most wanted man among the Americans. If they could make him surrender, then everyone would surrender.
Snow sometimes covered the bosque. Winter was accompanied by freezing wind. Navajos and Apaches had little protection from the storm.
Bosque Redondo itself is seen as a concentration camp, not unlike those that we had seen in Europe and in other parts of Eastern Europe in more recent times.
Mescalero Apaches at Bosque Redondo had long felt they were treated especially poorly.
There was always brutality by the soldiers. When they wanted the Apache to do something that just was not allowed, well then they would punish them and lock them up into in the stockades, and they would punish the people so that anyone else could see what they were doing, that they would do what they were told. And they were beaten, yes, they were.
Mescaleros vanished in the night in November 1865. The Mescaleros were not recaptured. they would never return to Bosque Redondo.
Nothing like that should happen to any people anymore. We suffered for it. We fought for our land. The only thing we were doing was fighting for what was ours. The only thing we were doing was fighting for what belonged to us, and it was taken away. And the lessons learned from that should be that this should not happen to anyone, or it should not be allowed to happen to anyone else, regardless of who they are.
Navajos wanted to return to their homeland. Promises for Bosque Redondo were not kept.
I think that it was a terrible time, and that I know with me, you know, my grandfather and my great-grandfather who was buried there, a feeling of injustice, you know, a great wrong that was done.
There was a coyote that was brought in to one of the ceremonies, and the people stated there that the coyote is going to tell us where we're going to be